Good evening, everyone. We're just going over the chat. And so I was doing that when Karen got started. So before we even introduce ourselves, I'm going to go back into the chat, was just seeing some very interesting information there. And I do want to echo what Lori said, that if you were not here able to join us for October, just like the flyer for this series says, it's nice if you can join us for all of them. We do understand that people, our plates are just so full. We're going to be talking a little bit about stacking our full plates tonight, but we want to let you know that we definitely built this series so that you can either do the whole series of the smorgasbord or you can do it a la carte. We also want to invite you to do like one of our colleagues said. Am I saying this right? Miss Cornett, am I pronouncing your name correctly? You can come off mute and let me know.
Yes, it's Miss Connett.
Miss Connet, if you look in the chat, I was so happy to see that it's from West Harvey School District and did not get a chance to attend October 11th, but there is a recording of October 11th that you can watch. So if you were not able to join us for the first session, we encourage you at your leisure. It's one of those things you can put on and let play while you're working in your office, and you will be able to get the information. I do have to, like, the caveat to that is that you are not able to receive the CEUs by listening to the recording, but it certainly makes it so that you can get all of the information. And of course, tonight we're going to talk a little bit about what we touched on our first session, and we will continue to do that. But the meat of each session will be specific to the title that you see for. So thank you so much for sharing that, Ms. Cornett, and we invite all of you all to do the same. And I just cannot even take it. Jennifer Graham, I saw RI and I thought, okay, Rhode Island Department of Education. Now, can you just tell us a little bit about what you do, Jennifer?
Yes, absolutely. I work on federally and state funded grants. And what I do is I work for MTSSRI, which is funded through the Rhode Island Department of Education. And my specific job, I work on the state professional development grant, which is focusing on literacy and closing literacy gaps for students. And right now we're working on a series of courses with some speech language providers and professors at the University of Rhode Island to take a look at early childhood language and literacy development.
So right there, first of all, welcome, Rhode Island. I hope that you will. We're experiencing some pretty nice weather here in Illinois right about now. So I hope you all are experiencing the same. And this is just so exciting. We have had in my time of doing presentations with ECPL, we've had people from Hawaii. Last year there was someone on from Ghana. They just somehow they type in professional learning and ECPL comes up and they have joined us. And that's one of the lovely things we learned from the pandemic, right? That we can really be collegial across the country. So I'm very excited to have you on. I would certainly if you wouldn't mind, give me a direct message with your email address. We always try to make sure the project director of ECPL is aware when there is someone outside of the state, because there's always that, like, how can we collaborate? And so I'm kind of jumping ahead of myself. Early childhood professional learning in our state holds the grant, holds the deliverables for early childhood MTSS. And then my partner that's joining me tonight, as she already put in the chat, Lori Hensold, Illinois MTSS Network is the K-12. And the whole reason we're all here together today is because we know that this cannot just be an early childhood lens. It can't just be a K-12 lens. And when I heard you say higher ed, I almost like had to just go off screen and take a sip of water or hot chocolate, because really and truly, if we could just get this language about multi-tiered system of supports into the higher ed pre-service syllabi and content, we would be doing a world of good for all educators and teachers. So welcome, welcome. Please direct message me in the chat if you're open to doing that. And I definitely want to make sure that I connect you to the director of the Early Childhood Professional Learning, who is hosting all of us tonight. So here we are, it's November 15th, right around the corner from, if you're like me, looking forward to some nice time away, maybe some shopping and maybe some eating, Cheesecake Factory for me. But we're just right around the corner from it. And I have to just say, Miss Connect, you're on my screen, and I love us as educators. I see that you're in your car, and I'm just watching you like, yes, that's what education is all about. We're going to get it in one way or another. If we got to listen to it in our car, we are not going to miss an opportunity to learn and to be able to take information back to our programs and to our families and to our students. So just shout out to all of us educators who are here tonight, consultants. We see a lot of administrators. I'm so excited to see our related services personnel that are on, because truly multi-tiered system of supports, the operative phrase there is system. If we build a system where we can synthesize tiered supports, and that includes related services personnel, that includes students who are receiving social work, that receives speech, includes speech language, OTPT, counselors, all of us coming together to create a strong system of the multiple evidence-based practices that we have, the better that we'll be. So I'm just welcoming all of you all here tonight. And again, I believe Karen has put in the chat where you can get the recording, so that if you were not able to join us for October, it's in the chat, and we just welcome you to check that out. Not now, but check it out a little bit later. Okay, so welcome to those of you who are just joining us now, and welcome back to those of you who were here with us in October. You've already heard me say a little bit about this. Early Childhood Professional Learning is our host tonight. And this is being done in collaboration with the Illinois MTSS Network. I am Dr. Antoinette Taylor. What you see here is just a little bit of information about myself as a consultant. I'm an independent consultant, and my work, obviously, I live in Illinois, so I'm always grounded in Illinois, the state that I love and believe in. But my work also takes me around the country as well. So this is just a little bit of information about myself, and then Lori will give you a little bit of information about who she is.
Hi, everybody. It's good to see. I just noticed that there's a lot of MTSS coaches. And so we as a network are all about the coaching thing in addition to professional development. So it's really nice to see all of you here. We've been part of several iterations of a state personnel development grant, or SPIG, and had the privilege of working with this Illinois State Board of Education and learning a lot about MTSS and connecting with lots of people across the nation. And here we're now seated in Northern Illinois University. I don't know if there are any Huskies out there, but we are glad to be here and glad to be collaborating with Dr. Antoinette Taylor and ECPL on this work.
All right, so we're ready to just jump right in, everyone. Here we go. We do want to let you know we go straight through this. If possible, you might get a little bit of time back on the end, but we're going to go straight through this 90 minutes together. So we want you to be self-attuned. Take good care of yourself. If you need to step away, get a drink of water, some tea, some hot chocolate, take a phone call. If you're at home and you need to tend to the children, please make sure that you do that. Step away, keep the sound on so that you can hear everything, and then come right on back in. But we will not have a formal break at all. And we want to let you know that this is a safe space. So what you're looking at, that is not misspelled grammar. We put that on there. We love this virtual space, but sometimes we can get Zoomed and WebEx and Google platformed out. Yes, we are all in the field of education, but we really want to let you all know when it's time to go in the chat, just jump right in there and brainstorm. We are not checking to see who dotted I's and who crossed T's and where all of the, periods and commas are. Just get them right on in there. This is truly a safe space for all of us. We already talked about before October 11th. This is where we focused on. And we really wanted to anchor this series in defining simply for a lot of reasons. I literally just had a conversation today with someone from the Nebraska Department of Education about MTSS and the importance of defining it. And you can't really define MTSS as it is today without doing a little bit of a contextual background check on where it came from, right? Where did we actually get to this point? And the reason we need to do that is because really and truly, MTSS has kind of, in some places, has gone off the rails. I don't know any other, better way to say that than to just say it plain out how it is. So we wanted to start with defining so that we could make sure, and I know this sounds very political, but it is important to kind of have a unified narrative so that as we move through this series and as you all are taking this back to your districts and to your programs and you're talking about it, you literally we kind of all be on the same page. So our objective then was to just provide an overview of the discussion of multi-tier system of supports just by defining what it is and then actually talking about how we got from RTI all the way to where we are now. What does it mean to recognize? What does it mean to respond, monitor, and document? And then really just as we go forward, for those of you, if anyone who are administrators on with us, especially if you're at a district level, making sure that everyone understands the definition of these words, it's really crucial. That's all, when you talk about evidence-based practices, we have to all recognize, when we say recognize, when we say respond, when we say document, what do we mean? We can all work for the same district. We can all work for the same program and literally sit in a room and based off of the lens or our cultural perspective or even our perspective from being in the field can look at words and see and they will have different meanings to us. So the importance of defining so that not only we define multi-tier system of supports on a broad level, but all of these words that we're using, what do they mean to all of us so that we not only have a system, but we walk away with a clear understanding of what our system is. And then, of course, learners and teachers. Again, today when I was in the meeting with the Department of Nebraska, I stressed the importance of what is your tiered support system for your educators. If we have a system in place that is meant to support students, if we don't couple that with a system that is going to support our educators and our administrators, we got 3 wheels on the car and we're missing that 4th wheel, right? You might be able to move a little bit, but it's not going to be a smooth ride. So just like with our learners, everything we want children to know and be able to do, we must be willing to teach them. Everything we want teachers or educators or speech language therapists, administrators, if we want them to teach it, if we want them to administrate it, then we have to have a system in place that is going to support them in doing that. So how did we get started? Just a little tidbit here. No Child Left Behind. Most initiatives that we are dealing with today in education, they start with federal law. And then before the federal law, there's this kind of groundswell of things happening that begin to, sometimes it may happen on a state level, it may happen on a municipal level, but ultimately enough of a groundswell happens to where someone in Congress says, you know what, this is so broad across our country, we need some legislation that will respond to it. So No Child Left Behind was a reauthorization of the Elementary Secondary Education Act. And as we were writing the language for this law, we were having some conversations about children being either over-identified or disproportionately placed in specialized services. And so when No Child Left Behind was being written into the law is what you see here. We talked about this in October, but again, just want to give you a little tidbit of where kind of our leading up to our conversation today to let us reconnect. So in No Child Left Behind, it very clearly told us that we need to have a system in place that teaches us how children respond to intervention. And so that respond and that intervention is really what response to intervention came from. In a lot of ways, we misinterpreted those words, but that literally, you could just pull that phrasing right off the page of the law. Respond and intervention came straight from there. So obviously, if there's a federal law in place, states were figuring out how do we implement the law? In Illinois, that meant by 2008, our state had to submit and within our No Child Left Behind plan, had to submit an RTI plan up to the Department of Education. The Department of Education finally approved those plans. And then starting January 1, 2009, our state was shifting that plan out to districts and programs to figure out, okay, this is what Illinois said RTI is going to look like. Now we need to do the training within our district. We need to make sure every principal, every teacher, families, everyone is supposed to know, so that by July 1, 2010, every district that was a publicly funded district, if you were a publicly funded school or program, you needed to have RTI in place by July 1 of the 2010-2011 school year. Now, whoop, if you're like me and you're a Star Wars fan, you can do, what is that? Star Trek is warp speed. I think Star Wars is where you jump into light phase and all of a sudden you're at a whole different, different atmosphere. Let's just do that when it comes to RTI and fast forward to where we are today, Every Student Succeeds Act. So as it is, and this is why we have amendments in place in our country, you learn from research, you learn from legislation. We learned from No Child Left Behind that the sticklers in that language of scientifically based research was just kind of got stuck. What does scientifically based research mean anyway? And that responding to interventions, the intention there was good, but the misinterpretation was very broad across our country. So when Every Student Succeeds Act was being created, that language shifted. So we shifted from scientifically based research to what you see here, evidence-based. And I really love the fact that not only did we shift from evidence-based, we talked about leading and sustaining student outcomes and improving student achievement. This immediately shifts us from what RTI was. Well, how did you respond? What was how did the children respond? They had a problem. You did an intervention. How did they respond? How did you document it? That's kind of deficit-based when you think about it. But with here, when you talk about leading and sustaining student outcomes, it gives us a shift from a deficit model to an asset-based model of teaching and learning. So of course, when we look at how do we sustain their student outcomes, and again, for me, I feel very strongly about this, we could easily say leading to and sustaining student and staff outcomes, namely approving what? Student and staff achievement. We live in a day and age where teachers are evaluated, programs are monitored. So just like we want our students to not only attain, but sustain achievement and outcomes, we want the same thing for all of our educators as well. From Every Student Succeeds Act, Illinois has really shifted into a framework definition of MTSS. And I just am so proud of our state and that this is the definition that has been adopted from pre-K through grade 12. I'll be very honest, I believe in giving credit to whom credit is due. We actually got this definition from the Illinois MTSS network. And then again, Cindy Berry is the project director of ECPL and the Early Childhood MTSS Grant our deliverables are within her grant, immediately said we need to adopt this. Why? There again, it's not a controlled narrative, but it's a unified narrative. It's so if we're going to talk about having a system within a district or in a program, certainly we need a unified system across our state. So, screenshot this, whatever you want to do, that's our definition that we use holistically across the state of Illinois. And so once you define, then you really get an opportunity to start developing and then moving to refining. And I'd like to say that just like with learning, all of us are familiar with continuous improvement plans or our school district improvement plans. We usually work on them every year as a consultant. Sometimes I'm working with districts on their plan. It's very cyclical, and it should be. Not so that we're constantly having to go back over, oh my gosh, didn't we talk about this already? But so that we can, do we have any wrinkles that need to be ironed out? Do we have any new staff that have come on and we're not here when we did our deep diving around multi-tiered system of supports and evidence-based practice? That refining is something that we should always be thinking about doing. And so as we shift into our focus for tonight, we've defined it. Now, how do you develop it? How do you refine it? For some of you in your stages, you're going to figure out where you are at in that. So this is just an overview and discussion of now creating a synthesized system. And the system that we're creating by law must be built with evidence-based practices. Where at? Across all learning environments. Special education, general education, twice exceptional students, talented and gifted students, students who are multilingual learners, evidence-based practices across all learning environments and for all students. So I have a quick question for you. When you think of where you are right now, place which one of these bullet points would best define your knowledge base when it comes to MTSS on the implementation spectrum. Go ahead and put that in the chat. And again, this is a safe space. So if your true candid answer is, I don't even know enough to know what I don't know, this is a safe space / Vegas principle. So go ahead and put it right in there. Well, I love it just coming right in. Love that. Exploration, innovation. Jody, I really appreciate you saying exploration / installation. Hey, were you with us when we were creating this? Because we're actually going to have a slide that talks about that in just a second. Fonda, thank you for your honesty there. Audrey, thank you. Thank you, Audrey Rose. That great understanding of it, that contextual knowledge of it at different there you go, Rebecca, at different levels for different districts. Yep, and sometimes just like a spectrum, you really, or kind of like the rainbow, and really even MTSS itself, we think of it as so stacked, like the green, the yellow, and the red, but just think of students. Students are, even our own development isn't really stacked. You can be at one phase in one area of development or knowledge, and then be in a totally different one someplace else. So it's very, very possible for the watercolor of understanding to truly be permeated through, be very permeable. Yep, Deborah, you're right. Now, what's so interesting about that, Deborah, is in Illinois was one of the few states that when our state was creating our our RTI plan way back under No Child Left Behind, our state immediately realized, okay, this has got to be inclusive of early childhood. So as Lori said earlier, there's been a lot of iterations of this, but in one way or another, early childhood, RTI, MTSS, IRTI has been housed within ECPL. And it's just so interesting where I hear people say, oh, we never heard about it for early childhood. And sometimes you still hear about it K-up when it comes to MTSS. But really and truly, we've always had the language about what this looks like in our state from a pre-K to 12 level in Illinois from the very beginning. I will say in the past, I don't know, Lori, maybe I'd say 6 years, certainly way about 3 years before the pandemic, we started doing a much better job of bringing the K-12 and the early childhood system together. And that included the people who are doing the work in those systems too. Yep. Hey, Kim. Yep. And when you have several buildings, right? Especially if you're on here and you are in a district administrator, it's like any other initiative, you're trying to corral cats, right? Because within that initiative, buildings have principal leaders, and there is a certain amount of autonomy that happens in our buildings because you're focusing on the constituency, which students are our constituents in your building. So it can be a little difficult to really corral a district so that we have the same wording and the same definition and the same implementation of MTSS. So for those of you that are at administrative level, we really are hoping that you'll have some things to take back with you to share with your staff and really think about this as grassroots and grass bottoms, right? It is administrative, it is superintendent level, it is building leader level, assistant principal level. It's also at that teacher level as well. So I want to just show you all something. Think of these words and then think of when it comes to implementation stages, look at these definitions. And these are not full definitions. It's just like snippets of what exploration means. Remember earlier on, we talked about the importance of, well, when you say monitor, do we all sitting at this table have a definition of monitoring? So here are ways that through implementation stages, you would not only look at those words, but that you could begin to define them. So I'm interested in knowing, as you look at these words, does it change any of your answers? So go ahead in the chat, not you, Miss Cornett, hands on the wheel, as I tell my children, do not text anyone, hands on the wheels, eyes on the road. But it's okay to say, oh, okay, so when I look at exploration and I see that means consensus building, maybe I might change my answer a little bit. Or you can just put in the chat and say, no, I think we're pretty good, especially if you talked about sustainability. I bold printed that because we really does mean we. Just like when we say students and we say all learners, and we mean all students, twice exceptional, students who are multilingual learners. In education, in your district, in your building, sustainability means we do business like this. It means if I were to come to your district and I wasn't in a superintendent meeting, where the district administrators are, and I went to any building, knocked on any classroom door, and spoke to any teacher, we'd across the district, the same shared understanding of not only the work and the implementation of the work is built in. When we say sustainability, this is how we do business. It literally means the efforts to make sure we all know. Who is we? Every adult that's regularly involved with the children that are in your building. And I love that definition from Eckers 3 because as our state shifted from Eckers R to Eckers 3, they were very clear in saying, you know what? When we say staff, we're not talking about teachers. When we say staff, we mean every adult that's regularly involved with the child. So relationship building, interactions, all of that. When they come into buildings, they're looking at everyone, right? Because you're all involved with the children. So that we here comes from that understanding that the work of this, it is all of our work, not just the counselor or the special ed person or the case manager or the MTSS liaison in the district or the building. We really does mean we. So I'm just going to go in the chat real quick and see if anybody changed their answer. Oh my gosh, Kay Madigan. I think we were in sustainability, but and you know what? I am so grateful to hear you say that because it is okay to press pause and say, where are we at really? Okay, it is okay to say, well, we thought we were high flying. You know, that plane was built, we had our airline crew, and we had taken off, and then COVID happened. And what is really going on here? What you did there, Kay Madigan, is you landed the plane. Land the plane and refuel. That's okay. You don't have to wait until it's sputtering. You got to make an emergency landing. What you were going to find, though, is as you go through you said, oh gosh, we feel like we're back at exploration. And if you think about what that means, you will move quickly through those phases because you're very familiar. You've already been with them before, and you'll be able to press pause and say, okay, in the light of our experience of COVID or trauma, or many other things that your staff and your students have experienced, what should this look like now? And because you've got a strong foundation, which we're going to be talking about in a little bit, you really are able. It's kind of like my son just took a position at Caltech. And so there's the whole thing in California and certain areas where you live, you have to be earthquake proof. Although in Illinois, there was an earthquake here, so we might have to look at some of our building structures. But in most places where there are, it's prone for earthquakes, the laws say you have to build that building to withstand an earthquake, right? You can't just have all the buildings falling apart every time it's an earthquake because you live in a place that could be prone to that, right? So where does that happen? At the foundational level, so that everything that's built up upon that foundation can withstand a little shakiness. I dare say that we might all agree that COVID shook us, right? That strong MTSS foundation is the thing that helps you kind of withstand the shake. Go back and check and see where do we need to shore up, strengthen up. We might have had a brick that got loose here. Just put that cement back on it, but the structure itself was strong. So for those of you like Kay Madigan are saying, we really felt like COVID just kind of brought us for a loop. Be sure to go back to your original plans. Like, what were you doing? And if they were working well for your district, land that plane to refuel and then be ready to launch again. Thank you all so much for being so candid and honest there. So now let's go back to ESSA. We talked about how ESSA replaced, and I'm sorry, Every Student Succeeds Act. We talked about how that law replaced scientifically based research. But what ESSA also did, we learned, and I remember when I was blessed to be a part of the creating of our state's plan. So for those of you that love it, yeah, thank you. And for those of you that hate it, would like to absolve myself. I'm on both sides of the fence. But I was blessed to be a part of creating our state's Every Student Succeeds Act plan. And I can't tell you how much easier it was because the language in the law was defined. And so we didn't just in Every Student Succeeds Act say evidence-based, it unpacked it more. So now this is what evidence-based means. With No Child Left Behind, and again, by no fault of the law, that the president that signed the law, who was George Bush, the legislators in Congress that created the law, no fault of anyone. But again, we learned better, so we did better. We realized that you can't, when you say scientific based, what's the definition of that? When you say evidence based, what's the definition of that? Who needs to do it? We learned from that. And so ESSA clearly defined it as this. So we took the guesswork out of it for state education agencies and local education agencies. There also is some flexibility here because you don't just jump to a strong evidence-based practice. The truth is, most evidence-based practices started somewhere in some district or some municipality or some building with someone doing something kind of like science. And you said, wow, you know what? This really worked well here. And then I think you were saying, I saw in the chat, someone was saying, we're piloting some things. It worked well in one place, so then you piloted it across a couple of other places. Everything has to start somewhere. So within ESSA, we do have the flexibility to that very last one. There's a rationale based on high quality research findings or positive evaluations that whatever it is that's happening, it's working. But then that and reminds us, what are going to be your ongoing efforts to make sure that this just wasn't like a, like a one-hit wonder type of thing? What are going to be your efforts to make sure that it can be generalized and transferable beyond a district, beyond a state, across the country? So literally, ESSA defined itself very, very clearly for us. And for that, I'm really, really grateful. And so, well, if we're talking about evidence-based practices, welcome to Illinois. This is what Illinois looks like when it comes to evidence-based practices. And guess what? This is pre-COVID. So this is before we started all of our COVID initiatives. We have to have trauma-informed practices. We need this practice. We need this practice. We need all these things to respond to COVID. This is some of what Illinois looked like. All of the things that as an administrator needs to galvanize their troops around. Things that teachers are trying to implement in order to have a high quality classroom. This is a lot. Yet the law says we must move forward with evidence-based practices. And the truth is, we know that evidence-based practices stand the test of time. But another truth is this. For any of us who are on here and we're just tired, right? You just feel like, my goodness, you mean to tell me it's not the Thanksgiving break period already? I need a nap, right? When we were younger, we hated when our, families told us it was time to take a nap. Now that we're older, we wake up in the morning, first thing we think, when I get home today by 5 o'clock, I'm going to be in the bed. I don't care what anybody says. I am going to bed. This is why we're tired. Because think of this, and think of trying to implement this multiple, and this is a variety of evidence-based practices, segregated as a separate system. It's like trying to drive your car with the wheel on one side of the street, the engine up by the stoplight, the tires, you left them back there somewhere a block away. You might have the parts of a car, but you don't have a system. Just like you may have all the parts of a car, trying to drive that car with everything separated does not work. The same is true for evidence-based practices. The same is true for sustainability. That's why you have that. But oh, we thought we were doing this. What happened? You can attain it, but just like these spinning plates, and you see some are already starting to wobble, you might be able to momentarily attain trying to implement all those evidence-based practices, but the sustaining part, that's where we lose out on. And if we lose out on it for our educators, we certainly will lose out on it when it comes to our students. So what do we need? We have to have a theory of change. So our theory of practice was that, well, you've got to do all these evidence-based practices. Okay, go, 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 implement, implement, implement. Our theory of change is we need a system. We literally need a system. And with that system, what we want to do is not look at children. What's wrong with the students? Are the parents not bringing them to school? You know, what's going on? Well, what's wrong with the teachers? Are the teachers not teaching? Let's look at the system. Have we synthesized it? Have we provided professional learning? Have we built a strong foundation that's able to take the shaking of time, of COVID, of RSV, you know, of just so many different things that we are experiencing in our world today, that we build that strong foundation and that we make sure that it was what? Connected. So what this does is it shifts us from trying to put all these plates and make these plates make sense into this is manageable. Okay, where does my curriculum go? Goes in the foundation. Where does instruction go? It goes in the foundation. Data collection. So many times educators don't get to have friendly discussions about data because we look at our NWEA, we look at our, you know, kids data, we look at our Eckers 3 monitoring. If you're from Chicago, you look at our REACH monitoring. We might look at our Danielson teacher evaluation, and that data is, we're doing this so often. But data is the most beautiful four-letter word other than love that's in our world today, because data says, come here, let's talk about it. Data says, I probably have the answer to what you're seeking. If you're seeking bright spots, come, let the data show you. If you're trying to figure out, well, what's really going on here? Oh, look at that. We got a chronic absence problem in third grade. It's not really it's masked itself in a literacy problem. It masked itself in a mathematics problem. But the truth is, oh, in third grade, we got an attendance issue that's going on. What's going on with behavior management? Oh, we need an intervention. We need an intervention. Oh, that's masked in social emotional development, learning, and competency. There's an app for that. In Illinois, we have strong standards for that. So as we think of that shift from spinning plates to taking evidence-based practices and building a strong foundation, we want to just press pause right now and ask you to go in the chat and tell us what you believe should go in the foundation for your program, your school, your district, for our colleague that's with us from Rhode Island, at your state. And notice, it's not just one thing. There's many compartments here for this foundation. If you even look on the side, it even goes way down. So in the chat, go ahead and share with us what goes in the foundation. And I really want to co-sign what Lori said to Ms. Connett. And then for those of you that didn't see that, you know, unfortunately, we've got a lot of turnover when it comes to staffing right now. And so I would really think about, that's something that we know is happening. So when I think about MTSS and my foundational practices, we need to put in there staff mobility, right? Because I know that I don't even have to wait till the next school year. I might be in January and I may have staff retiring. They're not coming back after winter break. I might have staff that graduates from, whatever college as Husky, Lori, I'll just say NIU. We've got NIU represented here, right? Western Illinois, National Louis University. You may have new staff coming in. Since we know that staff mobility is huge, within your foundation, what do we need to build? We need to build in ongoing professional learning, because we know that we need to make sure that everyone that's coming in has a great understanding of not only MTSS, but all of our evidence-based practices. Okay, the children and their growth. I'm just looking at these as they're coming in. Time. Oh, I don't know if Lori, how often do we hear, but there's just not enough time. The whole problem is we don't have enough time. We don't have enough time to do all the things that we need to do. So of course, how can we implement anything to fidelity? So I love that we're talking about putting that right into in our foundation. First of all, if there were more time in the day, let me just tell you right now, remember that safe space we talked about, being self-attuned and self-care? If there were more time in the day, we're not going to be spending, although you all are on with us for tonight and we love you and thank you for it, but we're not going to be spending every night, right? Our time, if there were extra time in the day, that should be spent drinking our tea, streaming something, planning our vacation to Cancun. We don't want to spend that time in working. So how do we protect the time that we have, manage the time that we have? Look at all of these things that are going in our foundation. Developmentally appropriate practice. Okay, since we talked about that, before I hand it over to Lori, can I just say that this is, and I'm not saying, this is one of the best books. It is the National Association for the Education of Young Children, Developmentally Appropriate Practices, 4th edition. Now, I will tell you, and while I'm going to put in the chat as well, their developmentally appropriate practice statement, it is available online. But the reason why ECPL is giving this book away is it literally goes from, try to pull this back a little bit there so you all can see it again. It goes from birth to age 8. And in the back of the book, not only do they talk about what developmentally appropriate practices are when it comes to family engagement, students by ability, cultural and linguistically, they actually give in the back examples. So when we're talking about science, in the 3rd grade, here's what developmentally appropriate practices look like. And they really help us with that pre-K to K and K to 1 and 1 to 2 and 2 to 3 transitions. This is really just such a great tool to have. And again, that's why ECPL is giving it. If you're going to be with us for the entire series, hang in there, because we do check to make sure that a different person is selected each time. And I just can't say enough about it. Please check out the link. I'm going to put it in the chat for you. But that developmentally appropriate practice, all of these wonderful things that you all put in the chat are just so really exciting. And all of them fit right into the definition as Lori leads us further into really breaking down and finding the diamond in the rough of those evidence-based practices.
Okay, thank you, Antoinette. I appreciate that great foundation you've laid. You'll see that the great minds have melded here as we go through, because I picked some slides and they look a lot like Dr. Taylor's slides. And so I am really excited about that when we can pull together what we do for early childhood all the way through to what we do for our 12th graders and those few who remain with us even beyond that stage, because we want to have one system again across the state of Illinois so that students are supported all along that way. And we're not breaking it up into little pieces. So again, there was the definition of MTSS, that framework for continuous improvement. You already emphasized the systemic piece. I think prevention focused is one of the big advantages of having a vision for early childhood MTSS, because the faster we can get ahead of the curve for these students, the better off they're likely to do long term. The data informed piece will look different as you go along that continuum from the kind of data you're going to be collecting in early childhood, the kind we collect in elementary and middle school and high school. They're a little bit different, but there's commonalities in that we're trying to assess where students are. We're trying to anticipate what they're going to need, and we're going to try to provide that. And then that continuum of supports and the responsive piece is really very, very important. Dr. Taylor mentioned that this definition came from some of the SPDIG work that we were part of. And I remember having debates around that word all in the very end of that. And all, we chose that word because we intentionally wanted to include the adults in the system. So when we talk about a continuum of supports responsive to the needs of, meet the needs of all learners, we're talking about the adults too, because we have to learn new skills and new attitudes, new beliefs, new perspectives sometimes too, in order to best serve our students. So that's what we're really aiming for when we have that piece in place too. So you already saw about me. You don't want to hear anything more about me. Here's our goal though, as someone mentioned, you know, the kids are really the focus. I think that was Laura. Yeah, Laura mentioned in that the children and their growth is really the focus. And that is exactly right. A continuum of supports to meet the needs of all learners. Our goal is that growth piece for all kids, not just some kids. And a 3-tiered intervention framework is one way to deliver those services. And we do want it to be a consistent continuum across. We're looking at things like our curriculum. We're looking at our instruction and the ways that we teach and the assessment pieces that we use, and make all of those very responsive to students. In a typical system, tier 1 is what everybody receives. It's our core curriculum. It's the core instruction. All students get that. And then in addition, we have tier 2 that's going to meet the needs of, oops, let me go back here. Oh, I'm clicking on my slides instead of yours, Dr. Taylor. Here, look how silly I am. We have tier 2 that includes the core content plus additional support. I really like the way this visual is because it does show how it layers one after the other. So for some of those students who'll need something additional to be successful in school, then we can go ahead and give them that targeted instruction. And then finally, that tier 3 piece as well. So those things for just a very few of students who are going to need additional instruction, and you'll see that layering. So those, even kids who are getting tier 3 supports are in some cases often getting tier 2 and always getting core instruction in addition. So layering it on and thinking of it as just, you know, we get chilly in the winter and we put that one extra thing on. And then we might put that scarf on, and then we might end up with a hat. I don't even care if I'm inside. If I'm cold, I'm going to do all 3 of those things. Sometimes our kiddos need all of those levels of intervention and support to be successful. You might have heard it said, if you build it, they will come. You know, well, that's not what we do. Not as educators, we don't. They come to us. We're exactly the opposite. Our students come, our children come, and then we build and adapt our ways of providing instruction in the ways that's going to fit the kiddos that we have. Sometimes we joke a little bit about not the kiddos we wish we had, but the kiddos that we actually have. And that means changing practices. So we want to support all of the learners towards that goal of improved outcomes for each and every one of them, whether their needs are academic, whether their needs are around behavior or social emotional learning, whether they have physical needs, whether they have cultural sensitivity needs. All of those things we consider in supporting our kids and what we want to do for them next. So here's an example of developing a system, and we want to look at it in terms of those layered pieces that I just talked about already. But that doesn't mean that the kids are tiered. The supports are tiered. So we don't talk about a tier 2 kid or a tier 3 kid. We talk about tier 2 supports for some children and tier 3 supports for a few children. But you might see it's good to take that strengths-based approach and understand that even a tier 3 student has great skills and abilities in other areas. I don't know what it was like for you the last time you got a new phone or a new tech device. And, for me, on my current phone, on the old phone, universal instruction is all I need. Just move me to a new device. And you're talking some tier 2 support at a very minimum. And heaven forbid I should get a non-Apple phone at any point, because if I do, you can be sure I'm going to need tier 3 supports, intense and individualized. So that's just an example of what we're talking about. A student receives different supports from universal to targeted to intensive, and they may need, so tier 2 in science, but they may need tier 3 in anger management. But then for reading, not quite as much support. Attendance, basketball, social skills, music, they got it down. So each and every student has those strengths that we want to leverage, but we also want to provide the support that they need. I like that illustration. And then another big piece of what we want in an MTSS, we want to use data to make educational decisions. And sometimes that feels a little daunting, but it really isn't. Here's an example of a problem-solving process. This happens to be a 4-step one. But as we try to deliver those tiered supports, we're asking these questions all the time. What needs do we see? Is it a school-wide need that we're seeing? Is the challenge there for a group of students? Is the challenge there for 1 or 2 students? And then we're going to try to understand why that challenge is occurring. So we want to maybe look at more data to give us more information. We might want to dig a little deeper. We want to ask ourselves about the learning environment. It's really important to look at the why when we go through this cycle, so that we can come to the really best conclusion as close as we can get to why that problem's happening. Because then in the next stage, we're going to develop a plan. We're going to choose the intervention. We're going to change the instruction. We're going to add more time, instructional time. We're going to do something differently. And we use that why to match the what that we provide. And then at the end, we always look at what is it that we did, and did it work or did it not work? And you may recognize that as a problem-solving process. You identify whether it's trying to figure out why your grass won't grow in the front yard, or why your children won't eat their vegetables, or whatever your problem is. You're thinking about, okay, there's a gap here. What's the gap? Why is this happening? What can I do differently? And did that work? And if you have an answer to how to get your children to eat vegetables, please put that in the chat, because I think that would be a very great thing to know. So these are the kinds of things that we ask ourselves at an individual student level, certainly at our classroom levels. We're looking at these things at school levels. And if you're a part of a district, you're looking at this at a district level and thinking about what are the needs that we see, what are our strengths, of course, but why are the needs occurring? And then what is our plan to address those needs that matches? And then did our plan work in the very end? We hear a lot about equity and equitable access to education for all students. And I think that's really an important piece of an MTSS, but MTSS is also sort of a vehicle to get us there if we use it correctly. Equity is not the same as equality, just to be real clear. I heard from a teacher who set this idea of equality versus equity up for her kindergarten students at the beginning of the year. And you know how little kids like to talk about their boo-boos, right? All their owies and their bumps and bruises. So the teacher started with one student who had a scrape on her knee, and she asked her, come tell us about your scrape on your knee. And of course, had a cute little story. And at the end, the teacher gave the student a Band-Aid on her knee, and then opened the classroom up. Okay, who else wants to tell me about their owie? And of course, children had all kinds of bruises from different, or headaches or things, but no matter what the student described to her, she gave them a Band-Aid on their knee and sent them back and said, thank you very much for your story. Some of the students were kind of confused when they got a Band-Aid on their knee, when it was their head that was hurt or their elbow or arm. But the teacher used that as an opportunity to show that it's really better to give each child what they needed than it was to give everybody the very same thing. And that set her up for being able to, in the classroom, give different kinds of supports and things to different children who need them, because she could refer back to that. Remember the Band-Aid on your knee? You didn't need one. You needed a Band-Aid on your head. So I thought that was a great illustration of that difference between equity and equality. Equity means holding really high expectations for each and every learner, and that can be challenging sometimes. And then providing those resources and support so that those kids meet those expectations. One question we want to ask ourselves is, do we really hold those expectations for each and every student? Because when things get tough, sometimes it's easy to say, oh, you know, they're just never going to get it, or they have so many disadvantages in their background, they can't learn to this level, or they're having such a rough time, I should lower the bar a little bit. And of course, there's a lot to think about in that, but I think at the core, we need to hold on to those beliefs that all children can learn, that we want to be proactive. We want to get ahead of problems rather than waiting for everything to be on fire. We want to try to be like Smokey the Bear, if you're old enough like me to remember Smokey the Bear, and prevent those forest fires. And then that systems piece too, that Antoinette was talking about, system thinking instead of everything in isolation and our car parts all over the roadway. How do we pull things together so that we can have a system that feels more like driving a car than running around spinning plates? So I'm going to ask you to put something into chat, if you would, please. What, as you think about it, what are some core beliefs or values about student learning, about high expectations that you think are really important? Maybe even some that you've heard in your school that you think are actually hindrances. And could you add those to the chat? What are some core beliefs or values about student learning that you hold dear and think are important? Have you ever heard any that you think actually hinder learning for students? And I'll pause just for a couple of seconds to let you put some of that in the chat. Sometimes it's hard to recognize what it is we really believe, but I think a lot of our behaviors and our actions stem from our beliefs. And so it's good to address those, to be reflective. Oh, these are wonderful. Look at that. Behavior is communication. Oh, yes. Yep. Not what's wrong with you, what has happened to you. Every child has strengths. All children are learners. All children have strengths. Differentiation. Oh, that's great, Rebecca. Thank you. Deficit-based mindset is one of the detrimental beliefs. Yes. And I think often we have a tendency to say there is a deficit here because they come from a certain socioeconomic background. There's a deficit here because of their, other relationships or their lack of prior education. And that's one of the big things about the response to intervention over the old IQ academic way that we used to identify students for special education. Now we're looking at those strengths that they have. Good. All children are learning. All behavior is a message. Oh yes, SEL is really important. Wow, these are really great. Curiosity. Differentiation. Good. I think it's really, hinder learning, calling students SPED kids or low income kids. Absolutely. And I've heard people say, well, they're a tier 3 kid or a tier 2 kid, and it puts them in a box instead of providing them a support to maximize on their strengths. Yep. Characteristics of diagnoses should be supported, not fixed. Looking outside of children instead inside of children for the reason why they're. Yes, woohoo, exactly. Where's my reaction button for the confetti? Because I think these are really excellent and they're easy to lose track of when we get into the devil's in the details kind of pieces of MTSS or really any instruction, especially right now when it's so challenging for everyone. In a nutshell, I think developing an MTSS means asking these questions and then developing systemic and systematic ways to answer them. What are we going to do? Or how do we know that a student gets it? And what are we going to do when a student gets it? What are we going to do when a student doesn't get it? What are we going to do when a student won't even try to get it? how do we know what it is that our students need? And how will we know if what we're doing is working? So kind of big picture, asking these questions over and over at the various levels, at the district level, at the school level, at the department or grade level, at the classroom level, at the individual student level. How are we going to answer all of these questions? Building an MTSS framework. I have two that are the same. Oh, there we go. So what are we going to do in school as we are currently doing it, which we talked a little bit about that post-COVID. What are we going to do when it isn't working for all of the students? And how will we know who needs something more, what they're going to need, and how it's working? So taking a look at what we're doing currently and being willing to change. If it's an evidence-based practice, is the correct evidence-based practice to use in this situation. If it's an evidence-based practice built on a rationale rather than a scientific study, are we continuously looking at whether or not it's working and then trying to make those adjustments? And I think creating that, I think we've already quoted Maya Angelou once, when we know better, do better, creating that growth mindset for all of us and that sense of collaborative efficacy. We can do this if we can do it all together. So building an MTSS framework takes into account a lot of things besides just that tiered system, though. We're thinking about the perspectives and the needs of staff and of students and of families and caregivers. We're looking at the input of community and stakeholders. And if we build it with those, including those perspectives and those their involvement, we can also get the kind of buy-in that allows for some of these resources to be there for us when we have that MTSS in place and we're looking for, whether it's stakeholders that become funders, whether it's community who allows us to use spaces or comes in and volunteers to deliver interventions or instruction or care and attention to students. There's lots of things that go into it. And then if we think about kind of those are the external pieces, the internal pieces are systems. We're looking at developing systems to support students around social and emotional learning, around behavior, about academics. We're looking at the systems for delivering education and evaluating education, the problem solving system. And then we're looking at, maybe I keep clicking the wrong one. There we go. Dr. Taylor, it looks like, there we go, data, there we go. So data assessment for problem solving, these are some big buckets that you might think about in MTSS, the systems bucket, so to speak, the data bucket and all the things that go with that. We want to be sure that we're looking at assessment in terms, we have lots of formative things going on, not everything is just an outcome measure, that we're always looking for that feedback as to what things are, again, who's getting it, who doesn't get it, why do they not get it, and what else do they need? And then the last big piece or big bucket here would be those practices that Dr. Taylor talked about. Evidence-based practice, being sure that we're getting the biggest bang for our buck by using something we know has some evidential support behind it, so that we can meet the students' needs. And then I put the teaming on there. I think we think of evidence-based practice a lot around instruction, but anymore, it really feels like to maximize that time factor, we need to work together as teams. So we need the expertise we each hold because our students have really multifaceted needs and we need to work on those together. So when I was trained, it was kind of a teacher in a classroom with the door and we shut it. That's not the way we approach this anymore. We really need to be a team. All right. A lot of times we hear about the three-tiered instruction and intervention piece of a multi-tiered system of supports and the database problem solving piece. And indeed, that's what I just brought to you. But the research tells us that there are a lot more pieces that we need to be aware of. There's over 20 years of research in RTI to MTSS, and that has identified some additional components that you see listed here. So data and evaluation is important, looking at the data piece, not only for problem solving and figuring out what we're going to do and what it's going to look like, but also that reflective piece where we're stepping back and looking at the big picture to see if everything is working. The leadership piece is really vital. We talked about turnover already a little bit. Someone who can champion the cause, someone who can allocate resources, that sense of collective efficacy. So teacher leaders who feel like they have the ability to step out and lead. Coaches are part of that leadership network, and that's really, really vital. We've seen MTSS up and running really well, and then sometimes a new administrator will come in who doesn't really get it and says, this is not what we're going to do. And all of a sudden you see a lot of things fall apart. And so that leadership piece is really vital. And then the capacity and infrastructure, that's where you find your professional development pieces. You're going to find the staffing pieces. You're going to find scheduling, which is always a big deal, that time piece again. So, and then several people have already mentioned the communication and collaboration to make all the pieces work, all the system work. We need the communication structures and the ability to work together, just like that car that Antoinette described that was scattered all over. To pull that together, when you pull it together, everything has to talk to each other. So the steering wheel has to actually move the tires the direction that they need when you're turning a corner. So that communication and collaboration piece is really important. So you'll notice we've made this like an archway, because the other thing we like to communicate is it's all together. Everything is connected, just like the systems in your body are connected. And when one is missing, the whole structure can fall. So it's a great place to start with the 3-tiered instruction and database problem solving, but then we want to build the rest of that archway so that we have strength and sustainability, as we've been talking about today too. So I threw some things on a slide here that might be part of your MTSS. And I thought we'd just pause here for a couple of minutes and let you share in chat, which of these things might you have in place? You don't have to put them all. You can. I invite you to put them all if you want to, but you can just put a few of them in that you have in place in your system. If you don't have an MTSS in place yet, and you're in that exploration, what are some things that you're talking about? Are you most interested in progress monitoring tools? Are you starting with the professional development piece? Are you most curious about teaming? Go ahead and put in there. You have SEL screening. We have progress monitoring tools, day-to-days, and collaboration. Oh, that's a fantastic thing to have in place. Oh, not just include. Okay, Jana, that's a great comment. You have a lot of the same things going on that are happening K-12, but there's not that communication and collaboration piece going across academic problem solving meetings, professional development. That's a fantastic thing to have in place. Yep, preschool doesn't have as much as elementary. That you're not alone in that. Yep. And you might just be getting started, so maybe you don't have any of these things. Screeners, and you're redoing those. Collaboration time, evidence-based curriculum, great place to start. Interdisciplinary team meetings, yes, fantastic. So you're getting all that expertise together to do that problem-solving piece. Wonderful. Data review days, a lot of, Dr. Taylor, these people have it going on. This is great. Okay, some of these might be things that you are considering too. I didn't let you differentiate those at all. All right, well, thank you for that. It's good to see how many things you have in place, and that's the way you start, is a piece at a time, so people aren't overwhelmed, and you go ahead and try to do the best you can. So we're always thinking about what we might need to change in our curriculum, our instruction, our assessment, and our learning environment. And we kind of try to use those 4 buckets. So curriculum is a place where we can change things. Instruction is a place we can change things, and learning environment, so that all of our students can be successful. So Yeah, tier one, if we define tier one as successful, that means that though about 75 to 80% of the students receiving our core curriculum are doing just fine and need nothing in addition. If we are not at that place, however, then we want to be taking another look, because there's no way we can provide enough interventions, even if we layer on those tier two and those tier three. We're never going to get out of a core problem if we don't have 75 to 80% of our students thriving just with core. So really, really important to take a look and continue to modify that and to change it and to make it what it needs to be to meet that benchmark. And it's an ongoing process, absolutely, but that's the only way that we can use our resources and have them stretch far enough, because the farther we go up into intensity, the more resources it also takes to provide tier two and then tier three supports for kiddos. So when you're thinking about how strong that core is, here's some things that you can think about. Do you have an integrated curriculum? Do you have something for academic, behavior, social, emotional? Do you have a schedule that supports what your students need? And there's a variety of different ways people provide additional instruction, whether it's in the core classroom with small groups, whether it's pulling kids out, whether it's walking to, and all the teachers are involved. Lots of different models. Do you have good teacher-student interaction? Those relationships are feeling secure. The culture in the school, do you have that sense of collective efficacy? Has there been a lot of disruption, and that might be something you need to address? I think somebody already mentioned consensus. Does everybody have consensus? Oh, Laura, yes, that is true. Yes, you're not the only one there. Tier one is other students, tier three. Standards, are we aligned to the learning standards that we have outlined for us? State or district requirements, technology and resources. So those are some things to think about when you consider the strength of your core and how well it meets the needs of your students. And again, we're talking, you have some kind of data. Hopefully that's giving you some insight. Before the end of the school year, you have some formative data that's going to give you some insight as to how strong that is and how well it fits and what you might be able to change or tweak. So we really encourage you. I don't know how many of you have ever had a fish that you got at a fair or another place, and you took that fish and you dropped it in your little fish bowl there and you gave it its food, and then you come back and that little fish is not really doing quite as well as it was the day before. So you think, oh gosh, let's give it some more food. It must be hungry. And if you're like me, the end demise of that fish was not pretty. And so we really encourage you to look at the water, because that's what they usually tell you, isn't it? When that fish doesn't do well, and you take your little fish bowl down to the place, and they'll say, you know what, your pH is way off. All you need to do is add this to the water, and then your fish will thrive. So we really encourage that. Focus on the water, all those pieces around that support students, that curriculum, that instruction, the environment, before we start looking inward at a learner and say, uh-oh, what's going wrong with that learner? We want to make sure all of these things are very, very strong. So tier two, if we're providing tier two interventions, that we can say that's effective and working well for us if at least 70% of the students in that group are making progress towards their goal. And you'll have to define what it is you consider to be progress. But if we want to be sure that what we're doing at tier two is working, then about 70% of those students should be making good progress. And again, they're going to need to grow just a little bit faster than the kids who are just receiving tier one, because we're trying to catch them up, get them back on track. And then tier three is effective if it results in their goals. So often we have individualized goals for students. Are they growing fast enough to close that gap by the end of the school year so they can start the next school year on track with everyone else? Those are things that we want to think about at tier three. And again, that's often a personalized intervention. Often it's something we're doing individualized to that student's needs. And it is our most intensive level of support for student, always evidence-based, interventions at tier 2 and tier 3, and especially in the core. So I feel a little bit like I rushed through that, but yes, I love that water analogy too. It really stuck with me. That's a great place to start. And I'm going to hand this back to Dr. Taylor.
So I wanted to address a couple of things in the chat. And I just am so grateful for these really candid responses. So we do have some colleagues that are on with us that are in private or parochial settings. And of course, you know, the federal law does speak to if you're publicly funded. I really admire our, you know, private schools, parochial coming on to these conversations, because the truth is evidence-based practices, they do stand the test of time. And whether it is in a private setting, a parochial setting, there's no setting where we're just saying, guess what, we're just flinging, you know, whatever we decide to do, hey, today we're going to do this. Wherever a child is attending their receiving their educational services, everyone is there because we believe in our children. So if you're in a private school setting, specifically if you're in one where there's not a lot of collaboration with the public school setting, you know, we're even finding that out with some of our charter schools, and we get that. I understand that. For the sake of all of our children, I would encourage you, I don't know, Kieran, if you can put in the ECPL has an MTSS. A whole part of the ECPL website is just dedicated to MTSS. I know Illinois MTSS Network, we try to have some of these resources so that whether you're a private school, parochial school, charter school, community-based programs, oh my goodness, community-based programs really need to synthesize their practices. That most community-based programs have criteria to meet from DCFS, Illinois State Board of Education, the Head Start frameworks. They are going through NACE accreditation or NAC accreditation, and they're being monitored. You've got to synthesize everything, make a system of all of these things. What does that really mean? What's the common thread? Right? So thank you so much, Karen. If you think about environment, well, in Illinois, there's the 5 essentials. The 5 essentials talks about environment, talks about planning, talks about leadership, that whole piece that Lori talked about. When we see common threads in our evidence-based practices, then instead of trying to spin those practices, we can stack them. And then that, to me, circles back to Rebecca was saying, you know, sometimes we can't get our staff they don't want to land the plane. They just want like, what's the tier 2? What's the tier 2? We have a problem. And of course they do. Like, I need this child to learn. I need this child to not have present this challenging behavior, because it feels like it interferes with instruction. And of course it does. But the way that we can help get them to that is to say, okay, we're going to talk about tier 2 by talking about tier 1 practices. Not so that we can point fingers at the teachers and say, well, see, if you were implementing this to fidelity, then you may not have these problems. Not like that, but really when we flip it and say, okay, let's look at the system that we've built. Let's look at it from the foundation up, right? Let's look at the group up, right? Then that's when we can say, we're going to talk about what's happening at tier 2. What is that targeted support, or even at that tier 3 supports, where those more intensive supports. But the best way to do that is to look and see, what is the seed that we planted? What is the brick that we laid? And so if you find staff that are just saying, but just tell us what we need to do and we'll do it, because they want to stop the problem that they're having. No strategy without a standard, no intervention without instruction is going to really work. So build your way to talking about tier 2 by looking at specifically what's happening at your foundational level. And also for our private sector folks, please look on here. Yes, Lori has put that in the chat as well. So you have the Illinois MTSS at NIEDU. You have the ECPL. We just don't want to leave anyone out there because they may not fall up under that the law says public school setting. So as we're just closing out here, go ahead in the chat and just share, if you will, like that one aha, like I have grabbed a hold of this and I am taking this with me tomorrow. I feel energized. I feel excited. I feel like, hey, we are on the right path. We're just going to keep doing this. Or I've got an idea now that I can take back. Go ahead and put that in the chat. And feel free to scroll up and see what some of your colleagues have put in. I just like Lori was saying, so many wonderful, I'm gonna even save this chat myself. So many wonderful ideas that you all are putting in. I'm just so excited about how we expanded our thinking about, oh, so this is what that foundation needs to look like. It's just not about what do we teach? What are the, it's so many different things that go in our foundation that make it strong. So if you can come up with your own aha or borrow one from one of your colleagues. So that tier 2 is not what kids need. So I think we were saying that, that the child is not in the tier, the support is in the tier. So we don't say tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 kid. This is a tier 3 kid. That's just like saying he's a special ed kid. He's an LD. He's got autism spectrum disorder. The instructional supports are in tiers, not the children. Okay, and we really, really want to get that across because we even talked about this in October, under RTI by default, that was some of that default language. I mean, I was consulting in places, oh, that's our RTI room. Oh my gosh, we're not an RTI room, RTI kid, tier 1 kid, tier 2. The instructional strategies, techniques, and supports are in tiers at the universal, targeted, and more individualized level, not students. And I might also say not teachers either. Wonderful. I love that developmentally appropriate practice. And as you're thinking about this, and Lori said this earlier, it's okay to say, you know what? This year, we're going to really focus on family engagement because our data has showed us that this is where we might be zigging when we should be zagging in our district or in our program. You don't have to do every single thing all at the same time, trying to create a system. It's like the person that you take your car into the shop and they'll say, this is our engine guy, right? This is the person that's really good on working on the engine. This person over here is really good on working on that exhaust system. It's okay to look at all of these things that we're talking about and then let the data discuss with you. Get into that discussion with data and kind of find that place where you're going to zero in. It doesn't mean that you're not doing anything about the other parts, but what it does mean is that you really allow yourself to begin something that is manageable. And if it's manageable and you experience success, the chances are some of you wrote in the chat about buy-in, right? You need your staff to invest. As administrators, you want to invest. So the investment and buy-in comes when you see that return on your investment. So it's definitely okay to start small and then grow. There's a scaling up brief that I love to talk about where you really start small and you scale up. And then as we come to our close, any questions that you all might have that we didn't get to, go ahead and put them in the chat. We certainly hope that we'll see you all in January and April. And then do know that our state just passed a law about trauma-informed practices. And so in February and March, we are coming back to you with what does asset-based trauma-informed practices look like when it comes to building that in your MTSS framework at a foundational level and at the targeted and intensive support level. So again, January, we'll see you, and again in February. Oh, I'm sorry, I went backward. January, February, and then we'll see you at the end of February for trauma informed and for March. Thank you all so much for your time today. Again, ECPL is our host today. Jump right